Today is Monday the 7th of March 2022 and we have a 5th day moon, an observatory, imaging system, and telescope to record it by. This operation is pretty straightforward. I have a Revolution 2 imager, a 4-inch achromatic refractor. I'm using a 0.5 reduction Barlow. I've got a moon in its 5th day. I've got the telescope trained, the 4-inch refractor, f10, trained on the moon. And we're going to get an image that's roughly the same as the telescope operating at about 100x. I'm using a handheld camera to image the screen, flat panel screen, 600 by 800 pixels, as the moon progresses across the screen. As the moon progresses, you should see improvement in the contrast of the image. More and more features should reveal themselves. And although I'd like it to be able to reveal the entirety of the moon on the screen, we're going to get a little bit of clipping, especially towards the northern edge as it moves across. Right now we're getting a great view of Mare Crisium. And Crisium has several craters that are located near it, as well as several other maria to the west of it in the direction of the sun. I'll check my lunographic charts, take a screenshot, and add some labels to that screenshot later, so we can all begin the process of familiarizing ourselves with lunography. So it's now about 5 minutes later. I've made a single change to the shutter speed from that of the setting of the moon, which was about 1 in 1,000, to something that captures probably every second or two, the shutter speed. And this is the image of the Great Nebula in Orion I'm now getting. I have to say that when I used the original spec for the moon on the Revolution 2 imager, what I got basically was nothing. So not even a single star was visible in the field until I increased the shutter speed. And as you can see now, with that single change in parameter, we're getting a luminous view of M42 in Orion as it moves across the field of view. The constellation itself, having now achieved sky dark, is a little past culmination on this particular date, which is the 7th, I believe, of March 2022. Okay, in this screen you can see the settings in the manual setup for shutter speed. It's 2 FLD, and I'm not sure what that represents, but it's very interesting. I can both control the manual set at the same time and reposition the scope. You can see that we can resolve the trapezium there. I'm going to try a little experiment here and give you an idea of what shutter settings do in terms of revealing detail. Okay, off to the left, the trapezium is entering the field. Now that's a group of stars, 4 stars, at the core of M42. Now watch what happens as I decrease the shutter speed. They disappear. We're not capturing enough photons to actually display on the screen. That was 1/500th of a second. Stars appear at about 1/250. By 1 in 50 you can see them clearly and they're nicely resolved. 2 field, they're starting to get brighter and you're starting to see some glow of the what would ordinarily be an airy disk. And the nebula itself only begins to become apparent. It's 32 field. Let's back it off a little bit. Looks like at about 16 field. And by this point, the trapezium itself is beginning to blend itself into a singular object of glow. Now, if we continue to increase the field, the shutter speed is slowing, accumulating more and more photons. It's overwhelming, the stars are overwhelming the image. Nebulosity is beginning to be revealed. And at 256 field, which is as high as you can go, now all we're basically seeing is a massive glowing field with streaks of stars, which indicate that the shutter speed is extremely low and the stars are moving quite a distance progressing across the field and leaving a trail. So, I want to go back to a setting that reveals stars only. I want to go back to about here, 8, 4, possibly 2 field. And if I wanted to video the moon, I'd have to go back to a 50th of a second or quicker. Okay, here's another exploration we can do. At 1/50th of a second shutter speed, there's far too much luminosity off the moon to reveal much in the way of discrete detail. 1/120th of a second, 1/250th, 1/500th, 1/1000th, 2000th, doesn't seem to matter. Oh, big change at 1/10,000th of a second. And that's as fast a shutter speed as you can implement, and yet it still reveals much of detail of the moon. So, once again, progressing up. The controller doesn't seem to be progressing. Hold on. Maybe the batteries are dead. Well, that gives you an idea right there. Yeah, that's strange. All right, well, we'll leave it at that, and I'll have to change the batteries out of the hand controller. But notice even at 1/10,000th of a second, considerable detail, discrete detail, is quite visible on the moon. Last night, I did some excursions and explorations using the custom scene select function in the Revolution 2 imager and screen. And I demonstrated the difference between 3 sets of settings that had to do with the moon, stars, and nebulosity. And all of that was done using what is called the custom scene select menu. Now, I have learned that the Revolution 2 imager probably came out of the security CCD imaging line of products, and that along the line some software coding was added in order to allow for a good deal of flexibility in terms of imaging quality based on what we might consider a continuum from bright sunshine on a beautiful day with minimal shading, for instance a parking lot, which would have some high contrast, or a street, all the way down to the idea that there would be times where it would be used at night with minimal illumination, and beyond. And the and beyond is to use it under astronomical circumstances. I suspect the greatest amount of flexibility comes out of using the custom scene select mode, which I demonstrated some changes last night when I had the sky. Tonight it's overcast. So, however, I am not at all sure what some of these other functions are, but I'm going to go through the menuing system to some degree to familiarize myself and you with what they are, and maybe I'll do a little research and add some captioning later. So, from Scene Select, you can go with Full Auto, allow the software to do the best job it can in order to give you some kind of a faithful image of what it's seeing. Through indoor conditions, where I imagine lighting is more limited and contrast is lower, could vary, who knows, but this is my speculation, to outdoor, where you'd expect a great deal of shading and sunshine. Backlighting, basically meaning you're going to probably try to capture images where there's light behind what you're imaging and you're attempting to see some kind of feature that you want to be able to reveal with a little better resolution. So that would be my speculation also. And that returns us now to ITS. And I am not sure what, maybe it's internal software, what ITS means. I'll have to do some research. Back to custom. Custom is what I used last night. Now, in the setup menu mode, which I've just reviewed, there are other modalities for configuring the operation of the Revolution 2 imager. Now, let's take a look at some of these other modes. Presumably, now I'm using a hand controller. Take a look at this thing. All right, it requires 2 AAA batteries, and it stalled on me last night. I put some more batteries in it, still didn't work properly. Figgled around, finagled a little bit with it, pushed the M and F buttons, which I have no idea what they mean, but they did shift the screen here to different kinds of modalities. I'll look at that a little more later, but right now I don't have enough light on it. But let's go ahead. Now when you use this controller, there's only one place to go, up. So when you go up, you can cycle through Exit, System Setting, Motion Detect, Privacy Mask, DIS, whatever that is, Electronic Zoom, yes, that's exactly what it does. It allows you to zoom in on some portion of the image being displayed. Picture Adjust, presumably Picture Adjust. It's not pixels, otherwise they might have an X in it back to Seam Select. All right, well, let's go down to System Setting. This is one I'll probably use in the future. If you go into System Setting, you have a sync mode, which is internal. Basically, I suspect that you can have an external sync mode. Once again, speculating. Going to the bottom, you can set some kind of ID for the camera, if you have like multiple cameras all feeding a single display, for security purposes, I imagine, and communication. Let's look inside that. Communication allows you to set up a protocol, give the device an address, set the baud rate, which is the rate at which data is uploaded. Data bit, 8-bit mode would mean that each unit of information would be provided as 1 byte or 8 bits of data. Parity, which would allow whatever you're syncing to determine whether or not the data had been corrupted along the way. And a stop bit says 1 bit. This is all software protocol stuff. Now, I have a background in electronics, so I do know some things about this, but not with regard to specifically the application of this particular Revolution 2 imager. But returning, LCD or CRT. Well, liquid crystal display or cathode ray tube, it's set to liquid crystal display, and that makes perfectly good sense. However, you could potentially feed the output from the imager into a CRT screen because it uses, from what I can tell, a serial kind of busing scheme, which is probably modulated to transfer the data. Okay, returning. Flip, I imagine that just basically flips the screen around, either north, south, east, or west, but that's speculation. Lens, you can have it on a manual mode or an auto mode, and I'm not sure about that, whether or not that means the lens can be refocused by mechanically moving a lens or whatever. Once again, speculation. I'm just leaving it on manual mode, and synchronization mode is internal, as mentioned earlier. Return. Motion detect, I leave it on. Basically, that allows the software to detect slight motions in an object and then correct for them so that you can accumulate more light from a specific feature. So I've turned that on, and I've noticed that works quite nicely in terms of not using a tracking mount. I'd probably turn it off if I had a tracking, if I used the Gemini 2 with all of its tracking software and features enabled, which requires some additional components be added to the mount. Privacy mask. I don't like that feature. Basically, what it allows you to do is put a masking area on the screen. I enabled it once, and it was a struggle to get rid of it. So let's not play with a privacy mask. It's just a big red rectangle or blue rectangle on the screen. Presumably so somebody doing something isn't seen, that doesn't want to be seen. I don't want to get any deeper into it. DIS is off. I haven't explored what DIS is, whether on or off. I think I might have toggled it. It didn't seem to have much functionality at all, but who knows. Electronic zoom, that's kind of cool. It would allow me to zoom in on features, for instance, on the moon. If I had the mount set up to track and I pre-positioned an object, a feature on the moon, and I wanted to feature it, and then I could zoom in on it for more magnification. A very nice feature indeed. Once again, picture adjust. That came down. Now, picture adjust. This is really cool, and I played with it last night, and it gave some interesting results. You can change the brightness of the image on the screen. You can change the contrast of the image that's seen on the screen. You could adjust the sharpness. You can set up the basic hue, and then finally, which is basically to skew it towards RG or B, presumably, red, green, blue, and then the color gain. So you can improve or accent color on the screen if you wanted to. Very cool thing to play with. I made some adjustments last night. You can see the settings I landed on. Returning. And then finally, back up to custom scene select. Within custom scene select, I did last night play with shutter. Now this was very intriguing. This gives you a manual way of filtering whatever study you're looking at depending upon its features. And we see that. Ooh, flaking out. I just selected that baby and it's going wild. This is something I don't know how to account for. Obviously, we're getting a failed syncing between the Revolution imager and the screen itself. And under these circumstances, presumably what I have to do is turn off the power supply, which is over here, turn it off, and then reset it. However, it stabilized without me turning it off. How nice. Okay, so now we're back to shutter. This, ooh, and it's flaking again. Okay, I'm going to reinitialize. Give me a sec. I just turned it off. Where's it getting its power? Oh. Okay, it must be feeding from the charging unit. All right, so whether I have the battery on or off doesn't matter because the charging unit is hooked up to the battery and it is feeding the system. All right, let's get back to this shutter. Now we go to shutter, and there's a full range. There is, the highest setting is 256 field, and that's it. Now, I'm not sure how long in terms of time 256 FLD means, but I imagine at some point it leaves the shutter open when it's capturing photons on the CCD imager for up to a second. Let's assume it's a second. All right, now you can drop it down to, let's assume, half a second, a quarter of a second, third, fourth. Now, let's do a different mathematic on this. This would be a full second. This would be a half a second. This would be a half of a second. Quarter of a second. This would be a half of a quarter, which would be an eighth of a second. Let's see if this works out. This would be a 16th of a second. This would be a 32nd of a second. This would be a 64th of a second. Let's see how it goes. And let's go to 1/28th of a second. Now notice, it may not have been 1/128th of a second. It was 1/128th of whatever 256 was. Because as soon as I transitioned from 2 FLD, it was down to a 50th of a second. So we might want to start over again and speculate about it, but I don't need to. Now, because that, all you have to do is play with this setting to get the best image you want. 1/120th, 2/50th, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 10,000ths of a second. And I was able to actually image the moon at 1/10,000th of a second shutter time. Now, that it didn't necessarily update the screen every 10,000ths of a second, but that was the shutter. So maybe, in fact, it did. Once again, I'm speculating. I don't know how this works, and I don't want to do any research because I want to use characterization principles of experience to learn about it rather than just going and reading online. Okay, now, AGC max in decibels. Well, dBs are decibels, and decibels, of course, you've seen them related to the idea of sound. The higher the decibels, the louder a sound is. Now, I have played with this, and I hopefully, as I recall, I might have demonstrated it last night in a video, which will give us some clues as to what it means. AGC max. So, obviously, it can go through a span. 36, 42, 44.8 is the greatest gain, if that's automatic, AGC, automatic gain control maximum is 44.8 decibels. All right, goes to 42, 36, 30 decibels, 24, 18, 12, 6. All right, now this automatic gain control may actually interact with shutter speed to determine how many stacks of 1/10,000th of a second images are displayed on the screen. Speculatively, that's what I'm thinking it is. All right, let's go back here now. All right, what I've done is I've run through the menu, and what happens on exit, you have a chance to save your settings. In this case, I didn't really want to save any settings, so I'm going to not save.